The distant blare of victory trumpets echoed through the air, sharp and triumphant. Lyra paused as her hand hovered over a bundle of herbs. Victory at last. But the sound, instead of filling her with relief, sent a chill down her spine. Victory always comes at a cost.
Lyra!
Master Rorik's gruff voice snapped her back to the present.
The soldiers need you. Take the medicine. The wounded are waiting.
Without hesitation, Lyra gathered the bundles of salves and tinctures they had prepared, her fingers trembling only slightly. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, heavier than her satchel. As she stepped outside, the world felt strange beneath the blare of trumpets. The streets were lined with people celebrating, but Lyra could only think of the aftermath of the battle. The wounded lying in rows, waiting, hoping for help. The camp wasn't far, but as she approached, the cheers of victory faded, replaced by the groans of the injured and the scent of blood thick in the air. Tents billowed in the wind, filled with the sounds of hurried footsteps and the low murmurs of medics. Inside the camp, chaos reigned. Lyra didn't hesitate. She moved to the first soldier and began applying a poultice, her hands steady despite the whirlwind around her, one wounded soldier after another. The battlefield had shifted here between life and death, where the real war was still being fought. The camp was filled with groans and whispers, but one figure caught Lyra's eye. A wounded soldier, separated from the others, his uniform marking him as the enemy. A prisoner of war left forgotten, bleeding beneath a tattered tent. No medic dared approach him. Lyra's heart pounded. Ignoring the stares, she knelt beside him, offering medicine and water. The soldier's eyes, clouded with pain, flickered with surprise. His lips parted to speak, but no words came. Lyra's hands were steady as she whispered.
Rest. You're safe now.
As she applied a salve to the enemy soldier's wounds, her mind focused on the task, blocking out the judgmental glances from the other medics. The soldier winced, his breaths ragged, but his eyes softened. Relief, perhaps. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over her and grabbed her hand that was applying the medicine.
What are you doing?
The voice was deep, commanding, and unmistakable. Lyra looked up to meet the cold, unwavering gaze of Captain Rylan. His eyes sharp like a blade drawn for war. His presence alone sent a ripple of silence through the camp.
That man is the enemy.
His voice like thunder, filled with restrained fury. His gaze fell upon the soldier, disdain evident. Lyra's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She stood, her hands still stained with the salve she had been applying.
He's still human.
She replied, her voice steady but soft.
I'm bleeding just like the rest of them.
A tense silence followed. Rylan's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. The air around them crackled with tension, as if even the wind held its breath. He let go of her hand and turned his head slightly.
Farron.
Yes, Captain.
Who is this?
His tone was low but dangerous. Before Farron could answer, he commanded.
Get her out of here.
Farron, a loyal lieutenant, approached reluctantly.
But Captain...
Didn't you hear what I said? Get her out of here now.
Farron sighed but complied, gently showing Lyra the way out of the camp.
This way, miss.
As Farron led her away, Lyra's gaze lingered on Rylan for just a second longer. The moment was fleeting, but it felt heavy, as if the lines between right and wrong had blurred beyond recognition. As Lyra stormed into the apothecary, her cheeks flushed with frustration, her steps echoing loudly across the quiet shop. Master Rorik glanced up from his workbench, his sharp eyes catching the tension in her every movement.
They expelled me from the camp.
Lyra blurted, slamming her satchel down.
That captain ordered it, all because I was tending to the enemy. How could someone be so heartless?
Master Rorik let out a low sigh, his hands pausing over the herbs he had been sorting. He turned to face her, his expression calm, knowing.
Captain Rylan is not heartless, girl.
He said quietly.
He is a protector by profession. His duty is to his people, and nothing matters more to him than their safety.
Lyra frowned,
But the prisoner, he was injured, barely conscious. How could he be a threat?
Rorik shook his head, his voice gentler this time.
The battlefield is full of surprises, Lyra. That man could have harmed you. Even in his weakened state, he might have used you as a bargaining chip to escape.
The words hung in the air, and Lyra's defiance wavered. She had never considered it that way.
Even mercy
Rorik added softly.
must be balanced with caution.
The grand spires of the castle loomed ahead as Captain Rylan approached. Victory heavy in his stride. The battle had been won, but there was no rest for a commander. His soldiers were safe for now, and it was time to deliver the news to the king. The scroll containing the details of their triumph was tucked securely in his belt, ready for the king's eyes. But as he reached the grand doors of the throne room, a figure stepped into his path. Draped in shadow and wrapped in an air of unsettling calm. It was Ardyn, the king's advisor, a man whose presence always felt like a shroud of secrecy clinging to the palace halls.
Well, well. Captain Rylan. I'll take the report from here. His Majesty needn't be disturbed by unnecessary details.
Rylan's jaw clenched, his grip tightening on the scroll. He had fought for that victory, bled for it. And yet, here stood Ardyn once again, inserting himself between the captain and his king. Reluctantly, Rylan handed over the scroll. As Ardyn slipped into the throne room, Rylan muttered under his breath.
That snake can't stop getting in my way.
Irritation simmered, but Rylan shook it off. It wasn't worth dwelling on. The dimly lit throne room was filled with the scent of incense, masking the heavy presence of illness that clung to the ailing king. His breathing was shallow, his eyes weary from years of rule. But they sharpened as Ardyn entered, scroll in hand. Ardyn approached with calculated grace, bowing before the frail monarch.
Your Majesty.
He began, voice as smooth as silk.
I bring the report of our recent victory.
And where is Captain Rylan? Why did he not come to deliver this news himself?
Ardyn hesitated for a heartbeat, just long enough to let doubt creep in.
It appears,
He said carefully.
that the captain believed sending the scroll would suffice. Perhaps the battlefield tired him too much to attend you personally.
The king's brow furrowed, a shadow of disappointment crossing his face.
I see.
Ardyn's lips curled into a faint, hidden smile. He had planted the seed. His intention was clear: to erode the trust between the king and the captain. Rylan, the valiant warrior who commanded the battlefield, was slowly being painted as indifferent, uncaring. As Ardyn made his way to the royal kitchen, the flickering torches cast long shadows. A place where more than just meals were crafted. Here, the king's lifeblood was sustained through carefully brewed remedies. The scent of herbs and simmering broth greeted him. The head lady, Mari, greeted him with a polite nod, her hands busy stirring a pot. Ardyn wasted no time.
Prepare the king's medicine immediately.
He ordered, his voice calm but with an undertone of urgency.
You must take it before the next council meeting.
Mari hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron.
Sir Ardyn, we've run short on several of the key herbs. We'll need more to make the proper dose.
Ardyn's eyes flicked toward the list of ingredients resting on the counter.
Then we must waste no time.
Ardyn said, turning to the nearest attendant.
You fetch every herb on that list?
The attendant nodded quickly, scrambling to take the list from Mari and running out of the room. Ardyn watched them go, his expression nonchalant. Every detail mattered in the king's delicate balance between life and death, and Ardyn ensured he controlled each one. The apothecary felt unusually still in Master Rorik's absence. Lyra moved efficiently, her mind focused on the work, when the familiar bell of the door drew her attention. An old woman entered, her frail frame belied by the sharpness of her gaze.
I need duskroot.
The woman said, her voice wavering. Lyra's brows furrowed slightly. Duskroot was a powerful herb, both healing and dangerous depending on its use. She retrieved the bundle and handed it over, but not before issuing a firm warning.
Be careful with this. If you boil it for more than 3 minutes, it becomes poisonous. Fatal.
Lyra said, her voice low. The old woman blinked in surprise but nodded gratefully.
Thank you, child. I'll be careful.
As the woman shuffled out, another figure entered. It was the king's attendant, his face lined with tension, handing her a list of herbs.
These are needed for the king's medicine.
Lyra scanned the list, recognizing the scarcity of the herbs.
I'll make sure Master Rorik gets this.
When Master Rorik finally returned, Lyra stood ready to brief him. But as he walked in, another figure followed close behind. Captain Rylan. His presence was commanding, as always. And though Lyra's heart skipped a beat at the sight of him, she maintained her composure, pretending his presence was of no consequence.
Master Rorik,
Lyra said, handing him the list.
these are the herbs needed for the king.
Rorik glanced at the list and frowned.
These herbs, they grow beyond the city's borders.
Lyra stiffened, her mind racing. Outside the city? That would mean venturing into potentially dangerous lands. Before she could object, Rorik's eyes turned to Rylan.
Captain Rylan, I trust no one but you to ensure this task is carried out properly. The king's life depends on it. You'll leave at first light.
He ordered.
With Lyra.